Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Infinite Danger Room. We're here for a new podcast in describing some comics and culture and fun things for you. I'm Matt Price. I'm here with Matt Howlett and Chris Borthick. Today we're jumping in the Wayback Machine again. We are taking a look. Well, we're going back to look at the future. As much sense as that makes, we're going to look at the first issue of Spider-Man 2099, which has a November 1992 cover date. It was written by Peter David, drawn by Rick Leonardi. And this was developed, just to give you guys some background, which you may already know, it was originally a project called Marvel, The World of Tomorrow, that was going to be a 64-page graphic novel by Stan Lee and John Byrne. And they each had different ideas about where they were going to go with it. So eventually they split up, and the parts of it that Marvel retained went into the 2099 line. The parts that maybe weren't Marvel specific that John Byrne retained went into the graphic novel 2112 that came out from Dark Horse that later led to the Next Men that he did from Dark Horse at the time. So that was the origins of this project. So the pieces of that World of Tomorrow pitch that Marvel kept, they went ahead and developed 4 series that they launched called Spider-Man 2099, Ravage 2099, Doom 2099, and Punisher 2099. Those were the first 4. And Spider-Man 2099, we have to learn how to say that over the course of this show, was the first one out of the gate, which Spider-Man, a very popular character, so 2099 version makes sense. Peter David, a pretty well-known, well-respected writer at that point, also known for writing science fiction and prose, so it makes sense for this more science-fictional take on the thing. So we didn't necessarily talk about how we're going to do this, but Chris, do you want to start off maybe doing some of the recap, maybe kind of looking through and doing some of the recap for us?
Sure. Well, it's a good science fiction action open. In the book, we get some joyriding teenagers in their futuristic air car flying around in an area they're not supposed to be in. When they run afoul of the modern day police on their flying motorcycles chasing Spider-Man 2099 and trying to apprehend him. And so we go on for a couple of pages with them.
Big double-page splash where they introduce him, and you've got the different costume. I mean, it's cool. Pretty quick. They put you into the world because you have flying cars and all kinds of things happening, and then page 2, double-page splash, big action. Anyway, keep going.
He's being pursued pretty much by the modern day future police, I guess, and he is pretty dialogue free for the first few pages. He's not doing the typical witty Spider-Man stuff, and it's more about them trying to showcase, I think, what his powers are and what he can do. It's page 7. We actually see he has a different power than Spider-Man, in that he's got claws that he uses to rake one of the cops with. Not very Spider-Man-y, but, still pretty interesting. And then he finally starts some talking, get out of the way, and he's just trying to evade them. It's not really clear why he's evading them yet, but he's definitely wanted by the police for something, or in typical Spider-Man fashion, just mistrusted and they're chasing it.
So your whole first third of the book there is basically one big action scene.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now, Matt, do you want to jump in and do some recap? You want to do kind of the middle part of the recap here?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I like is it goes back to which it's revealed soon that his name's Miguel O'Hara, is the man behind the mask of Spider-Man 2099. In this very futuristic-looking apartments. He has a Siri in life form, essentially.
Yeah.
This hologram woman that basically kind of recaps his missed messages while he was gone, which I think is an interesting take, because it seems like, maybe in 70, 80 years from now, we might actually have holograms speak to us in lifelike form as if they were right there in the room with us. In the same way we rely on Siri, or maybe you have Amazon Echo in our home. So I like that idea that sometimes futuristic comic books don't really focus too much on the technology of like how this really could exist in this world from 100 years from now when it was written. And I felt like the creators did a good job of showing that in here. But he goes back to his apartment essentially, and you can tell he's absolutely distraught over what's happened to him. His I don't know if they gave her a name here, but if you can help me out here, Lila.
Yeah.
She is going over his missed calls, and most of them are from his fiancee, but he's dismissing them and doesn't want anything to do with them, and he's absolutely upset with himself over what has happened. And then he is asked by Lila to enter into his journal because he hasn't entered in several days, and this is where he kind of recaps and tells the story of how he became Spider-Man, which they haven't really called him Spider-Man just yet, but the next panel...
It is on the cover.
It is on the cover. And really up to this point, Spider-Man in name is really the only similarity between O'Hara and Peter Parker that I can tell, other than there being kind of a tragic accident that created their powers or created their lives.
There's some Spider-Man, he's maybe smart alecky a little bit. He's a smart scientist, but yeah, there's a lot of differences as well.
It's almost like the Peter Parker in comic book form today has more in common with Miguel O'Hara than the teenage Peter Parker from the early days of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
But we're introduced to him. He worked for a company called Alchemex, where they're developing a project that's supposed to give basically superhuman strength to men, and Spider-Man is referenced as the influence of this. Mm-hmm. And we go on to more of them doing tests on prisoners as part of a sentence commuting process.
Did you catch the sentence?
They're going to age him. Yeah, instead of putting you in prison, I guess it's cheaper just to age you to the age, which is an interesting point.
Yeah,
you're sentenced to 20 years, but rather than you have to spend 20 years in jail, we'll just age the 20 years off of you, or in this case, 40 years off of this guy.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty terrifying. To think about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's. But obviously, this experiment goes wrong, and he turns into this strange beast-like goon, which is pretty horrifying as well, because I think the guy probably would have been better off if he just accepted the 40-year aging process. It looks like he collapses and perishes. It's hard to tell, but that's kind of what it applies here. For all I know, in the next issue, he comes back. But what I liked about it was, I want to go back to the very first page of this book. The influences from Kirby, Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
The flying cars, Nick Fury's flying car, the officers on these flying motorcycle, helicopter plane things. I mean, that reminds me so much of like the early Fantastic Four issues where the Thing's riding this floating bike that doesn't look like it could actually fly in real life by any shape. But it's an interesting...
Well, I was going to mention at some point, I didn't mention the inker Al Williamson, who was known for the Flash Gordon strips and later worked on Star Wars, certainly has a lot of science fiction in his background as well. So kind of an interesting choice to kind of get somebody in that classic science fiction illustrative mold to bring that in.
Do you think that Al Williamson consulted them on as far as backgrounds, design?
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't know for sure.
If you ever meet Peter David or Rick Leonardi, you should ask them. Yeah. If you ever see them at a con, maybe we should have them on a show one day.
Absolutely.
That'd be fun.
Let's see. Okay, so we've got a few. To close out the recap, Chris. You want to take over with this last bit?
Then I'll probably have some comments here at the end. But so yeah, it closes out with after this horrible accident with this prisoner that Miguel's like, nope, done. I'm not gonna be part of this experimentation anymore. And his boss, because he's about to resign, slips him a drug called Rapture that is apparently highly addictive, and also of note, everybody in the company is using except Miguel apparently. So that's awkward and says a lot about corporate life in the future, I suppose. But so he's like, you're going to be really addicted. You're not going to be able to get out of here. I've got the drug. Yada, yada, yada. So Miguel wanders off. He has a little moment with his fiance, which you actually see her with a shiner in the holographic episode, part of the comic book, and then you see the incident where she gets the shiner, where he accidentally.
Looks like he bumps her
Bops
with her
her
elbow
elbow,
because he's
yeah.
hallucinating or something.
He did not actually punch her, so there's no abuse going on. It's just an accident. But he's very upset about being drugged, so he heads back to work where he decides that he is going to do a genetic imprint of his original DNA on himself.
He says he put his own file in the system, and so
he's been toying with his own DNA.
So he's going to use the original gene print to clear out the rapture from his DNA.
Yeah, and then we have the I don't know what kind of villain you would call this, but the guy at work that you don't like, that just keeps coming around you, and he and this character have had some verbal sparring in the first part of the book, and so Miguel implied that he is not very smart, this man named Aaron. So Aaron decides that since Miguel's in the little art chamber, that he's going to press all the buttons and break things and do all sorts of stuff, and so at the end of the comic book, he's expecting that he killed Miguel, and in fact Miguel is like stumbling out of the wreckage and turns with some vintage vampire fangs to face his
Looks very vampiric at the end here. And that's kind of where it ends, a little bit of a cliffhanger. It doesn't even necessarily tell you how this ties together. You got to go to the next issue, but that's your first issue of Spider-Man 2099, which, guys, when it came out in 1992, was the best-selling book of the month and was the fourth best-selling book of the entire year, and that was the year Superman 75 came out. So it was behind Superman 75, Wildcats 1, and Venom Lethal Protector number 1, and then Spider-Man 2099. So obviously very, very popular out of the gate with this concept.
Yeah, I think of all the 2099 books, it was the one that really had the staying power. The rest of them just sort of fell off in their readerships, if I remember right.
Well, I think part of it was, I think Spider-Man sold the strongest of all 2099 books. I think the 2099 line as a whole probably suffered when Marvel started going into bankruptcy, and there just wasn't money to keep all these various things afloat. So, but from what I understand, this was always a pretty good selling book, and then I think he left. They had made some cuts and maybe fired the editor because they were going through bankruptcy, and I think that's when Peter David quit this book around that time, and I think they canceled it maybe after that. Anyway,
so with it being the one of the highest selling comics of the year it came out, as well as probably the 90s in general, what do you think creates the staying power of Spider-Man 2099? I mean, he's probably one of the few characters created in the 90s that still has an ongoing series, off and on again, but is still regularly published, either whether it be miniseries or not, or cameos in books. Why do you think that Spider-Man 2099 is a lasting character? What about
that's
him?
a good question. I mean, Spider-Man anything is usually a pretty good recipe for success. If you're going to do almost any kind of alternate version, I think they do, any kind of alternate worlds, people are always interested in the Spider-Man analog in whatever world that is.
He and Batman share that, I think. Batman is always the DC version of the Elseworld guy, and Spider-Man, too, is.
But this went a little farther away, really, from Spider-Man than you might have thought. I mean, it pushes the concept pretty far in that the costume is very different. I mean, what did they get right? What works about him? Those are some good questions. I don't have great answers for you, other than I think the world is very well developed, and he's a very well developed character. As far as he's a scientist, but he's a little egotistical, and he's got different motivations. But specifically, what do you think? What do you think about the visual works? What do you think about is it the fact that it's somewhat different? That he can exist kind of contemporaneously with Spider-Man, but not look like he's stepping on his toes exactly with a slightly different look.
Yeah, he's a little more, at least color scheme and everything else. He looks like a little more of a dark character. I mean, doesn't necessarily mean that he is.
Right, blue main body of the costume with a lot of shading and so on.
Yeah, and the much more pronounced webbing behind him, along with the claws. I mean, he's kind of a more dark future character. I think kind of As I was reading this, I was reminded a lot of Batman Beyond the animated series. Same sort of atmosphere, same sort of character development. It looked like. Of course, the main characters are different at their core in their origins, but still, it definitely harkened back, even to sharing a girlfriend named Dana, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, pretty cool. But Spider-Man, it's like you said, he's the safe bet for.
There's a lot of things about this world that are interesting. It's a corporate. Like, the corporations have become very powerful, almost more powerful than nations. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of interesting. He also kind of foreshadows a lot more of a Hispanic influx in what the United States is. And Miguel O'Hara is actually, I guess, half Hispanic, half Irish. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot more Hispanic characters in the 2099 universe, which, could have something to do with its popularity to some degree if you're looking for somebody who is maybe more diverse. Right. In the 90s than what the main Marvel line was at the time. So that's another reason. And people like cyberpunk type stuff as well, and it's got a lot of cyberpunk type elements. So from what I understand, the book consistently was selling over 100,000 copies an issue, even as they were going into bankruptcy, but that Peter David quit based on them getting rid of the editor of the line at the time, which I'm sure you're going into bankruptcy, you're letting people go, probably just bad.
Well, speaking of Peter David was he's a very good writer from this time, and he told some great stories. I think he had his own following, just like any artist did, and a lot of people flocked to what he was doing to see what his take on characters were this time. So, I know I was one of those. I had read, I think he had done his Star Treks by now, and I had read his Star Treks and started kind of following him in comics, and so. Tells a good story. He has good dialogue. He goes a little too witty at points sometimes, but that's okay. That's Peter David. So,
it's funny you say people that follow him. I remember when Spider-Man 2099 came out when I was a kid, but I would pick him up on newsstand if it was available. But when you're a kid, you just kind of pick up whatever's available for you, unless you really get into series and you follow it. But even in college, I remember picking up any book that had Peter David's name on it, just because I did follow his stories, and any book that he was on, you knew it was going to be a solid comic, and it was going to have a good story, and wasn't going to seem phoned in or rushed, so to speak. It was going to be a solid story with fleshed out characters, and X Factor is definitely one of them that highly enjoy, highly recommend.
Yeah, I actually got to meet him once for a convention. We were actually helping out with it, so I got to drive him from the airport. So that was pretty entertaining. Very interesting guy, kind of quirky. One of the things though that you were talking about, the well plotted out stuff that I remember about him that we all noticed is one night after the convention, everyone was kind of sitting around, and all of a sudden he just starts writing on napkins all these plot ideas that he's having, and so we were like, wow, that's awesome. He's never really off. It's like, oh, I got to write all this stuff down. And he's just a really good writer. So.
Wonder if any of those translated to a comic that you read later down the road.
I don't know, because we didn't actually get to peek at his notes. So
they may have.
I actually met him last year. He was in Oklahoma City last year at the Amazing Oklahoma Con. Yeah. Had a great conversation with him there too. Very nice guy. So.
Yeah, I got him to sign a book for me. I should have brought Spider-Man 2099, but I didn't. I just bought his.
I'm
his
embarrassed
novel.
That you didn't.
I bought a copy of his Artful novel and had him sign that.
There you go.
Because he writes comics and novels, very prolific writer, and like I said, there's 40 some issues of this. And I think had the Marvel not been going through other issues, I think this probably would have continued.
Probably.
But I think because they were contracting with bankruptcy and other things were happening, that's probably the reason you saw Spider-Man 2099 go away. And he's come back, and I think the series is relatively successful now as well. But this is pretty much a good introduction, I think, to that world. It gets you into these evil corporations. It gets you into the scientist guy. Kind of hints at some of the other stuff that's going to start happening. So, if you're launching an entire line, this seems like a pretty good way to do it. The only thing you might say is a negative is it kind of ends on a cliffhanger and it doesn't quite tie everything together. You would have needed maybe for a 48-page first issue or something to do that. But perhaps they're just, also a cliffhanger. Sometimes get people to come back for issue 2.
Right.
So if I was going to say a negative of the issue, it may just be that there's still quite a bit up in the air at the end of this issue as far as... But I think they did probably put that chase scene at the beginning so that you wouldn't be just go through the book and there's no, well, where's Spider-Man? The Spider-Man 29, which is, something that, as we were talking about decompression,
Right.
I think with Ultimate Spider-Man, I'm pretty sure there's no Spider-Man until issue, 4, 5, 6, something like that.
Right. It takes a while.
It takes a while for Spider-Man to actually show up in the Spider-Man book. So this was, having that chase scene at the beginning here was a way to get around that being a problem.
Well, there's maybe there's a good reason for that, is that Peter David was in charge of sales, if I'm not mistaken, sales of reprints and collections around the time when he started writing comics.
He was in their sales department, yeah.
So, maybe in his mind he was really writing for the trade, so to speak, by decompressing the story, spreading it out over time. In fact, if you picked up the most recent Spider-Man 2099, number 1, that was just relaunched, I believe, late last year, or maybe mid part of last year, Spider-Man's barely in that issue too. I think that's really more of his style, is just kind of a slow burn, let the characters develop and tell a story rather than try to pack it all in one comic. So I guess one point I'm getting is that he may be the person who's wanting to not only sell the comic but also sell the graphic novel down the line for someone who wants to read a whole story and be proud of his work, so to speak. So.
I think he always did have a lot of subplots going. I don't know that he would be thinking about writing for the trade in 92.
Maybe
when
not.
very few trades were coming out. In fact, I don't even know what trades have come out of this stuff. I'm sure it has been collected since. Sure. But at the time, I'm not sure that was a big... I'm not sure that was very much... Because it was so rare for a trade to come out back in 92. You would see one occasionally, but there were very, very few things were collected.
Yeah, I think a lot of his style back then was to kind of open with something to get your attention, like he just did in this book, and then develop the story out. So,
but certainly having ongoing subplots was something Chris Claremont did a lot of.
Yeah.
They definitely wanted you to come back for the next issue.
Right.
Maybe slightly different than what writing for the trade is now, where you want to have a definitive 6-issue stopping point or whatever. But again, very strong first issue, compelling. I think probably gets you to want to come back. What do you think comparisons today, would something like this work if you launched it like this today?
I think it would. It's got enough action and it's got enough story going on. I think that it would work really well. Like we've kind of noted, though the modern story seems to be more slow paced, so this might even be
more fast paced than what you get.
More fast paced than normal. But
if you compare it to say Ultimate, yeah,
right. But
at this point, Ultimate was 15 years ago.
Yeah, but I think people would appreciate it. I always appreciate jumping right in. Origin stories are great, but it's great to start with something and then explain it afterwards like this in a flashback. So,
okay, Matt, other thoughts?
Where did he get the costume? So I'm kind of thinking about that. It's obviously a very
that actually is explained later. Do you want me to kind of tell you more or less what happened?
Yeah, because
it's a bodysuit with a mask that he once wore for the Mexican Day of the Dead festival. He chooses this costume because it's the only clothing he has that is made from unstable molecule fabric, which I guess maybe you can buy in the future. But maybe it's expensive or something, I don't know. So he had this as a costume that he wore to the Day of the Dead festival, and that's why he picks that out.
Well,
that's almost a better explanation than how the actual Spider-Man got his costume.
True.
So that's where the costume comes from.
Okay, cool.
Which is, I don't remember what issue that is in, but it's at a future issue. They kind of explain that. Okay, cool. Any other final thoughts? I guess before we wrap up our look at Spider-Man 2099 issue 1 from 1992.
Well, I think it's a very well paced and well written story, and it's one of those that, again, if you haven't ever seen the beginning of this character, because he has been around for a very long time, it's definitely worth checking out. Very entertaining, very vintage 90s, but very, very good.
I think because it's set in the future, it maybe doesn't come across as dated as maybe something that was set in 1992 or 1993 would, because he's not worried about the fashions or the hair or whatever. It's already supposed to be somewhat different, so it doesn't maybe come off as dated as something that was set in the literal time would.
True, it's just mostly in dialogue type things that you would find the 90s influence, but still.
And they added some of their own curse words and different things as well.
Sure.
So,
No, they did a good job.
what do you think, Matt? Final thoughts from you?
We talked about the styles. The suits in these are very 90s.
Yeah, even though it's 100 years in the future, they still kind of have 90s look. I'm sure they were trying to push them forward, but in places, obviously, you're inspired by the time you're in. So,
True. No, other than I guess when I was a kid when I read this, I thought he had webs, but he doesn't. He actually doesn't have webbing. He has it on his costume, but not a web. He doesn't have like a web slinger, so to speak, where he can swing from buildings, things like that. That was one thing that when I reread this, I started thinking to myself, oh, I guess he actually doesn't have the web powers like I remembered him having. So maybe that's introduced later in an issue. But again, I guess it goes back to my statement earlier that really the only thing he shares with the Spider-Man is the name.
Right.
Really isn't even a spider bite, so to speak, to give him the...
True enough.
I think he eventually will have some type of webbing. But he didn't really use it in this issue.
Nope. Just jumping around.
Okay, well, I think we kind of hit the high points. We'd love to hear from you if you have read this comic and have thoughts and want to share them with us, or if you want to read it based on what we've talked about today and want to share your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. You can find us on Twitter at Danger Infinite. You can find us at Infinite Danger Room on Facebook, or you can shoot us an email, infinitedangerroom@gmail.com. Our episodes are released on SoundCloud via News OK, and we're also on iTunes, where if you are listening to us on iTunes, feel free to leave us a rating and a review, and we would love to get that kind of feedback, and we'd love to read those on future episodes as well. And again, just feel free to share any feedback you have with us. We'd love to hear from you. For Chris Borthick and Matt Howlett, I'm Matt Price. Thanks for listening.